let's take a look at the vocabulary. Make sure you take notes on the pictures and what their meanings are in their equations. First, let's take a look at parallel lines and a transversal that cuts through them. Keeping in mind that parallel lines will have some sort of a triangle or an arrow on the line. Copy this down. Alternate interior angles, opposite sides of the transversal, and inside the parallels. That's where they're located. Alternate interior angles are always congruent to each other. So our equation will be angle equals angle. Consecutive interior angles are on the same side of the transversal, inside the two parallels. They are supplementary to each other, which means they add up and equal 180 degrees. Alternate exterior angles are on opposite sides of the transversal, outside of the parallels. They're always congruent to each other. Your equation is angle equals angle. Corresponding angles are in the same location at the intersections, but at different locations. They are congruent to each other. For example, the one in this picture, they're both kind of in, if you turn your head a little bit to the left, they're both in the top right. Copy this example down with the numbers in the picture. One shortcut is to kind of think of checkers. If you were to jump across that transversal down this path, all of these angles are congruent to each other. 11 and 12 are congruent because they're vertical. 12 and 15 are congruent because they're alternate interior. 12 and 16 are congruent because they're corresponding. 11 and 16 are congruent because they're alternate exterior. The same goes for the same path going the other direction. If you jump across, these angles that are on the same path are all congruent to each other. What's the relationship for angles that are not on the same path? Like, for example, 11 and 13. Angles that are not on the same path are supplementary. An isosceles triangle has two congruent sides. When you have two congruent sides, you'll also have two congruent angles. Let's take a look at a concept called base angles. If two angles in a triangle are congruent, then the sides opposite of the congruent angles are also congruent to each other. Take a look at this example and make sure you copy it down and put it in your notes. I have two angles that are equal to each other. So the sides opposite them, 7 and the 2x plus 25, must be congruent to each other. Pause the video and see if you can solve this problem before I move on. The converse is also true. If two sides in a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite them are congruent to each other. Let's take a look at an example. Make sure you copy this down. Opposite of this side is a 55 degrees. Opposite of this other one is angle 2. And up at the top it says the measure of angle 2 is equal to 6x plus 1. We can set that up as an equation because opposite of congruent sides are congruent angles. Pause the video and see if you can solve the problem before I show you the answer.